What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Babbles Nonsense podcast. On today's episode, it'll be a little bit different. I'm going to obviously try to do this solo without me and you here, so we'll see how that goes. So today's episode is not just a rant. It's not just another story, but kind of a real, raw, honest question that I think a lot of us do ask ourselves, but maybe are afraid to ask out loud or ask another person. And that is like, why can't I just ask you why? I'm a why person. I've mentioned that several times on this podcast. And sometimes I just want to know the answer why. And I know Minu has been on here and she's, therapized and she has life coached us all, saying that sometimes we just don't know the answer why. And sometimes we won't ever get that answer why. But sometimes you just want to know why. And to me, asking why can be normal, but I know in society, it's not considered normal to ask people questions, or it's often labeled as quote unquote emotional, crazy, or desperate. So that's what we're going to get into today. Let's talk about it. All right. So thank you all for, bearing with me through these kind of relationship emotional topics. It's just kind of what's in the forefront of my thought processing right now. And sometimes when I try to do this solo, y'all just hang in there. But I do get a lot of feedback and y'all are so sweet and so supportive in the DMs talking about relationship stuff, just because I sometimes feel like I'm weird when it comes to relationships, or quote unquote situationships. Cause we all know I'm definitely not a relationship expert. I'm definitely a situationship expert in this stage of life, but honestly, to nobody's fault but my own. I've had to, work through some therapy, some life coaching to understand why I keep picking emotionally unavailable men. And I think it's mostly because I may be a little emotionally unavailable myself. But also, as we get older, I think I just get set in my ways. So it just becomes harder to date because I am getting closer to 40. So it's just getting harder to not have things the way that I want them. I mean, I'm obviously okay with change, and well, I don't know if I should say that, but going back to the intro to this, I know me and Minu last week talked about why exes come back, and I talked to her about closure, and she's, very big on you have to give yourself closure. And I do believe that. I used to think that people, should give you closure, but obviously we have to give it to ourselves, because sometimes we're not going to know why things ended. And sometimes it's just not meant to be. And, the universe does have something out there better. And maybe in the moment we don't think that there is, but when that something better comes along, we're like, oh, this is why it didn't work out. But for me, and I'm not talking about just romantic relationships, I'm talking about in friendships, maybe when friendships end, or, or there's things I sometimes just have questions, my mind just circles. So I know I'm often well, why? Why did that happen? Why did this happen? And we've always been taught to play it cool. We live in this culture, especially as women. I know some men listen to this, but mostly women. We're told that the minute you ask for clarity, or the minute you show any softness or confusion, we're then quote unquote lost. We're told to act like you don't care, be unbothered, don't send that double text, never let them see you sweat. Or match their energy is another one that you hear a lot. But here's the thing for me. I get tired of pretending that I don't care when I do. And I get tired of letting, people, whether it be, romantic relationships or friendships, or, just in general in the world, walk in and out of my life like it's a revolving door, and being expected to never question, why, why is this happening? If I'm such a good person or such a good friend or, such a good girlfriend to you, then why didn't you stay? And, the answer sometimes is an answer in itself when you don't get a question, obviously. But sometimes you just want clarity, and I'm sure everyone can relate that thought pops in our head, why, and I'll just give a few examples. I know, like, I talk to my girlfriends and stuff, and like it seems to be a common theme with women. Like, for whatever reason, women go straight to our looks. Like, we're like, was I not pretty enough? Was I not thin enough? Was I not thick enough? Was I not, voluptuous enough? Like, we go immediately to that. Like, fortunately for me, that hasn't happened in a long time, because I have healed a lot of that self-validation, or not self-validation, but like seeking validation from external sources, which is a whole nother podcast for a whole nother day, which that does give me an idea to do one with menu. But a lot of it for me is just trying to stay true to who I am, because at the end of the day, I do care about people that walk in and out of my life, and it's really hard for me. And again, that goes back to like a lot of childhood abandonment where, my father wasn't there, and then, my mom had to take care of my sister a lot because she was in a lot of trouble most of the time. And so it was just like it's mostly like I guess it still is external validation. Sometimes when I do these solo podcasts, it's almost like a therapy session to me, because when you're talking out loud, you're just kind of like, and obviously I have the headphones on, I'm listening to myself talk, then it's just getting all that energy out. But anyways, so I guess it still is that an external validation, because you still are seeking clarity from an external source versus yourself, when sometimes that is the answer. But to stick with this topic of why isn't it okay to ask why, so, and like it's just easier sometimes to use like a romantic relationship as an example, just because it's one that I think universally people can relate to, because some people don't care, if family walks in and out of their lives, and some people don't care if friendships walk in and out of their lives. But for whatever reason, when it's a romantic relationship coming in and out of your life, it seems to sting a little bit different. Not saying that friendship breakups aren't as hard, because sometimes I think they are harder, but I think it's just universally like people understand the thought process behind it. But for me, like asking why and asking for clarity isn't always about trying to get someone back. It's not about begging. It's not about rekindling anything. For me, it's about understanding, mostly for growth. Like, I take it as a, growing experience. Like, where could I have changed here? Or what did I do wrong here? It's not that I'm trying to blame the other person. Well, sometimes, there are just situations where you can, but I'm just saying, like, when it was like a mutual thing, or like things just didn't go the way you hoped for, like sometimes it's like a growing, experience, like asking for clarity and like where I could have grown as a person, so that I maybe don't do it in the next relationship that I get into. But for me, it's about the people who make promises and who share moments and who look you in the eyes and make you feel safe, only to vanish and maybe switch it up a little bit, or, the whole saying, it's not you, it's me, or they don't say anything at all. So it's those conversations when you've reached out and you've asked and you just don't get a response, or you don't get the clarity, or maybe you get a very vague or like just a very vague answer, if you will, So I did some research on this, and the psychology, like I wanted to look up the psychology behind it. So here's the frustrating part about the psychology behind it. Half the time, the people that you're asking, why for clarity, sometimes they don't even have a real answer, and they don't know why that they did what they did, or maybe they don't know why they hurt you. Maybe they were selfish, or maybe they were scared, or maybe it was just that they were emotionally unavailable at the time. But instead of them processing that, they avoided it. Like me and you talked last week about, the avoidant behavior, because avoiding things can be easier than being accountable, or, taking yourself and saying, here's where I messed up. Like, having that honest conversation back and forth means that someone else is going to have to listen to what they also did. And sometimes people aren't ready for that. And maybe I am different in the fact that, like, I want someone to tell me if I've messed up in a way, and I can take criticism and I can handle conflict. People tell me that all the time. It's not that I love it. It's not that I enjoy it, but I can handle it, because I don't take it all the way to heart. Now, sometimes I do. Like, if someone I, extremely value and care about says something, I'm going to take it to heart. But also at the same time, I try not to take it personal, and I try to understand that it's more constructive than, just criticizing, so that I can grow as a person and become a better person every day. But going back to the psychology behind it, this is what I found in my research. So don't shoot the messenger. But a lot of people were saying online that men are rarely asked to reflect on things, or they're rarely called out And when they are called out, like when men are called out, a lot of times they spin it back on you. So you often get, why are you so dramatic? Stop being crazy, and so there's a big difference when you're asking for clarity and someone does, that's where gaslighting comes in, and not to use like a buzzword or anything like that, but that is sometimes what happens. So I think people get afraid to ask why, because you want to, look like the quote unquote cool girl, like you're unbothered. That's what, the culture is telling us to do. And it honestly is just a culture trap. We have been brainwashed into thinking that the quote unquote cool girl is the one who wins in the end, and the one who doesn't care, the one who doesn't ask questions, and the one who lets him come and go without ever demanding any explanation is, quote unquote, the cool girl, the unbothered person. And a lot of times there's all kinds of sayings. There's a saying that says, the one who cares less wins, because they're not emotionally involved. They're not emotionally, wound up in the thought process or asking questions or, stuck in that mind trap. But here's the honest truth. That quote unquote cool girl suffers in silence. And I'm not saying everybody. I know I do have some friends that really are unbothered, and sometimes I strive to be that way, but I think that I come off as a very unbothered person based on what I show maybe on social media, or maybe how I am externally towards people that don't really know me. But the honest truth is I'm actually a very emotional person, and I, get deep in thought a lot, and maybe that's where I go wrong. So going back to, for me, I feel like that quote unquote girl suffers in silence sometimes, because it's almost like we make excuses for other people, or we cry behind closed doors. We journal instead of confront, or, you get cheated on, but then still pretend you're above it. Like, those are just some examples, but I don't strive to be like that. Like, I know, like, when I talk to my friends about it, they're always like, don't show any emotion. Don't do that. But like, honestly, I just have to stay true to myself, because that's who I am. And I feel so unauthentic when I act like I'm unbothered. So I feel like we should normalize sending text and questions, like, for example, like maybe a text that says, hey, I'm not trying to fight. I just need some honesty. Can you give me some clarity? Let's talk about this situation. I'm just saying, like, let's normalize direct conversations instead of having to decode, like a text or an Instagram story or social media, or second guessing every look, every like, every heart, fire emoji, whatever, the silence as well. Like, cause sometimes Menu says this all the time, like, we make stories up in our head. And I have said this, and I live by this. If someone can't give me a direct and honest answer back to a question that I've asked, then don't get mad at me for the story that I portray in my head. Because if I need that story for closure, then that's what I'm, going to do. And for me, if someone can't answer that question when you've, asked a very, I feel like a mature grown-up question, or tried to have a mature grown-up conversation for healing and closure, then that really says more about their character than yours. Like, if someone gets defensive, cold, dismissive, or even mocks you or gaslights you for asking a clarity question, then honestly, like I've said kind of throughout this podcast, that is an answer in itself, and that shows you their character. Because if someone really truly cared, even if it didn't work out between you, and again, I'm using the romantic example, at least they could respect you and your feelings enough to give you honesty, to give you clarity, to help you close that chapter and close that door and move on. And that can go for same in friendships. Like, if you have a friendship breakup and you want to, sit down and talk about it, then that just says more. Because to me, it's about respect at the end of the day. If you respect me and you truly cared, then you would, give me that closure and, clarity that I'm, seeking. But again, I know that you have to give it to yourself. And I know that if someone doesn't, there's, obviously, options like block him, delete the number, grieve, mourn what you thought it was. But at the end of the day, don't shame yourself for asking the question. Don't shame yourself for caring. And don't ever believe that your desire for clarity makes you weak. Because in my opinion, it actually makes you strong. So I'm kind of going to just end it there with this final thought. So if you've been holding on to a question, if you've been rehearsing the text in your head or maybe in your notepad or your journal, if you've been feeling like you're crazy for just wanting to understand, I do not think you're crazy. I think you're just someone who loved with intention and someone who showed up with honesty and someone who deserves that same energy in return. And so I say send the message, but I know all my friends listening to this are like, no, don't do that. But if you're going to do it, it has to come from a place where you're strong enough to handle the silence or strong enough to handle not receiving the clarity or the truth that you wanted. And obviously, guys, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a life coach. So just take my advice with a grain of salt. Like, don't be sending text messages and getting, in heated debates and messy conversations and then coming back and blaming me, because that's not what we're here for either. I'm talking about like a respectful, mature, grown-up conversation that you're ready to have, but also both parties have to be ready to have it. You can't force conversation on people that are not ready for conversation. So yeah. That's all I really wanted to say. So if this episode resonated with you, obviously I would love it if you would share it with a friend, share it on social media, tag me, tell a friend who may be in the same place of confusion, or maybe they're going through a heartbreak. So yeah, until next time, guys, bye.